Neil here. Well, I hope you enjoyed meeting John as much as I did. I was remiss not to thank him at the start of the last episode, so I do also want to say a massive thank you to you, John, for sharing. In this next chapter, John talks through his grandparents and their stories, and we find out that the women in the family like to make gift packages for their boys, late into adulthood, I might add, which is very sweet. He has some interesting reflections on diversity, or lack thereof, and I urge you to listen to the end, where his reflections on legacy have stayed with me since our conversation. His eloquence on this topic is quite remarkable. It made me think that if we can sometimes imagine ourselves at the latter end of our lives looking back, how that might help us focus on what's important and put less attention on the stuff that isn't. Enjoy the story. Okay, we're recording. Okay, so I'm sure you have. Well, I think at the end of our call, you also agreed that there were some things to still cover off and a bit of life to talk about, life to live, indeed. I don't know if you have a thought on some of those gaps. So, in my mind, there was actually one thing I wanted to jump back in time to, and then I thought we could jump back in time a little bit, and then if there's some things you have to talk about, we can cover those gaps off. If you thought, oh crap, I didn't mention that one, and then there's some other, we can move forward into some of these themes and things that Stephen had written down that I wanted to ask you specifically. How does that sound?
Yeah, that sounds brilliant. Yeah, I have thought about it, so I have got some contributions to make.
Okay, so let's do the jump back with me in time, because it's kind of actually earlier than you spoke about, and then we'll come to some of those gaps. So you shared a lot about your family life as a child and on working when your dad was working on the estate, and how that all felt, and it sort of was very it's very rich. I could really feel like I was there almost.
Oh, good.
I wanted to ask about your grandparents, a little bit more about them and going up the tree just a touch. Partly because we didn't get to it, but also because at the end of our conversation, you mentioned you really wanted to take Stephen and Laura up to southwest Scotland, into that area where you have a lot of family history. So could you maybe start by telling me the names and when they were born of your grandparents, and then a little bit about their life as you know it, and then perhaps your relationship as how much time did you get to spend with them?
Yes, I'd be delighted to do that, because it did cross my mind that there were things that I'd quickly gone over, or you kind of get distracted and you go down another route, you didn't actually mean to do that, and so on. So again, I did say to Stephen, you were a very good interviewer, and you just proved it again. Obviously, just talking really on my father's side, at southwest Scotland, with my gran and granddad. My granddad was born something like 1890, something like that. I have got the details actually, but I've not got them to hand.
It's just mad to hear. It's just mad to hear someone now. You're going to talk about someone who was born before the 1900s. It's just mad, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, it is, and unfortunately for him, he was born early enough to be of fighting age when the Great War started. So he was involved in the Great War, and he was involved with the Royal Artillery, and he fought. And there are various stories in the family, because he was a good shot with a gun, and that he was actually a hunter of snipers, as well as anything else.
So the snipers got sniped by your
Well,
granddad.
yeah. That was typical. I mean, I found that very interesting, reading stories about the battles in Ukraine and so on, about the snipers there, and the best snipers are women. And the reason, one of them in particular, called Cuckoo. See, I'm digressing already. Called Cuckoo. She said the women are the best because we can sit still. Men just cannot sit still, so they get discovered, and they get shot. But the women can just sit. They can just sit. Anyway, my father was involved in that kind of thing, and obviously with the artillery as well. And he got married, and had a daughter who was called Rita. Only the third person I ever knew called Rita. And then she died. My granddad was a charmer. He was he was a ladies' man, and he well anyway he married my granny, who's a lot younger. And I think, well, also because he married her because she got pregnant. So my grandfather became persona non grata with her family. Most people in a lot of people in those days were blacksmiths. This was the trade. You know, horses were important, blacksmiths were important, and so on. So his side of the family were blacksmiths. My granny's side of the family were a different set of blacksmiths called Erskines. And it took me a long time to discover as a boy growing up that they didn't like talking about my granddad. They didn't think much of him. They thought he'd done some naughty things there, really. But that's where my dad came from. And he fell out with his dad for a while because he was born out of wedlock.
Ah, okay. So yeah, let's get this straight. So you're talking about your dad's parents, right?
Yes, I am. Yeah, I'm
Okay.
talking about my dad's parents, and of course that was important in those days.
Hmm.
But anyway, but they did stick together and everything, and they had two more children. So my father had a sister and a brother, but my grandfather also had another child while he was married to my mother, who lived in the same little fishing village and was the spitting image of my dad.
Oh gosh.
And they knew each other. He was called Mac. He never knew me because I was only a little boy, but they chatted and so on because they had the same father. You know, yeah, I saw my granddad in action, so he was a charmer. He could chat, and he
What was his
enjoyed
name? What was his name
William
and his?
William Turner. William Turner. I don't know if he had a middle name.
Oh,
I need to check that out. William Turner. Fortunately, I did get a kind of relation in the family before she died to write out the family tree on the Turner side. So I have got that, and I will perhaps start to go through that. I've never felt the urge to do a family tree until perhaps now, and so I might actually get onto that because you know there are things. My granddad was. As I said, I've described his personality, and he wasn't, I don't know, maybe the most organized or something like that. But before the Great War, he had set up in businesses. He ran a post office. That was important in those days. He ran a haulage business. He ran a hearse. You know, he would take people to the cemeteries and so on, you know, help to bury the dead. Some old cemeteries up there in Scotland, in windswept places, in bays and so on, where the French admirals buried hundreds of years ago and so on. But then he had a partner and he went off to fight in the Great War. And when he came back, his partner had, well, basically messed him about. So he lost. He lost a lot of those businesses. We never got to the bottom of it as to exactly what happened, but it partly, no doubt, to do with my granddad maybe not being as driven as he might have done. Anyway, after that, he entered the police force, and that's what he did for quite a long time. But he was a good bit older than me granny. But so that was him, and he had brothers and sisters and so on. I'm a bit vague on this. I'm gonna have to check that out.
mm,
My granny was, as I say, a lot younger. So my dad had a sister and a brother, and another, I think, brother it was, like I mentioned to you, that died,
mm,
and
mm,
so
mm,
on. But they stayed in the village of Port William. Everybody knew each other up there. This was if you go into the 50s and 60s, it was a reasonably vibrant time. The fishing village was very active. The farms were very active. Some of the school friends of my dad used to run the corn mill and things like that. It was a magical place to go on holiday. You know, and I'd go around to see his pal who ran this mill. It was run by water for a long time before electricity, and he had a little dog which was a ratter, a rat catcher, because with all that corn around, place was covered in rats. And it was just for a little boy. It was so entertaining to watch this dog go to work catching these rats and so on. Yeah, again, it's all part of that Tom Sawyer, Huckleberry Finn type adventure stuff, you know, because
yeah, magical.
there was no TV. There was no radio actually. In those days, the little house that my granny and granddad had no electricity, no inside toilet, no running water. You got the water from there was a hill just round the corner, and a tap attached to the bottom of the hill, and the fresh water used to just come out through the tap, just normal water. It hadn't been treated or anything. And you'd go around with a bucket. They used to call them pails in Scotland. I'd go and walk around with my granddad, and we'd fill the bucket and bring it back. And that's what you use for cooking. It's what you use for drinking. It's what you use for washing, shaving. I used to watch him shave with a cutthroat razor and all this kind of like a proper cutthroat razor and so on. So
Amazing.
if you had to get up in the night, you had to go outside to the end of the
Yeah.
garden, and that's where the loo was. And as I say, it was oil lamps. Oil
Okay.
lamps, you had to turn those on at about 9 o'clock at night to get some light. And you're trying to read your little comics, because they were big things in those days, books and comics. And I'll tell you, I thought it was a funny story because those comics were important. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about when I say comics.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Yeah, right, okay. And when I was at university, and I'm sharing a flat like you guys did, with 5 other people, we all had our separate rooms and so on. And every weekend, I'd get a letter from my mother and my granny. My mother would send me a letter saying what was going on and put £2 in the letter. £2. That was quite a lot of money, you see. That was great. And my granny used to send me a letter, and she used to send me the comics. She used to send me I'm 19 years of age, for God's sake, and she used to send me comics just about every week. But the funniest thing about it was when the mailman put them through the letterbox, you could hear the doors of my pals, all the rooms opening, and they're all running for my package. And they just rip it open. They'd throw the letters into my room, and I never saw the comics for a week. And they used to share them around, and I'd read them in about Thursday or something like that. And they were just waiting for the next, because we were just kids, really, as you are at university. You think you're grown up, but in lots of ways you're not.
This is hilarious, John, because it reminded me of something I wanted to talk about last time. But your Anne did the same thing for Stephen, right? So
yes.
Yeah, I don't know if this is a Turner thing or she just took it from your side of the family. He used to get these care packages.
Yes, that's right.
And we were jealous, of course. But the funny thing is, there was a slight difference in the stories. We didn't get any look into his care package. We didn't know when they arrived. They were they were whisked up to his room, and he, every so often would open up a big wagon wheel 6-pack, and he's like, "Where'd you get that from?" Or some sort of skin moisturizer, and we never got a look in. Those care packages were just kept in his little secret wardrobe. So yeah.
Well, absolutely. Well, yeah. It's something similar, and that kind of thing. I never realised what women are like, because it's a woman thing. That it's a female thing.
It's lovely.
But I just wouldn't dream of doing anything like that. It wouldn't cross my mind to do anything. But both my mother did, Anne did, my granny did. They were obviously thinking about you and so on. So going up to that fishing village was fantastic. And when I told you about living in the borders and the job my dad did and how well we ate, everything was fine. Well, it was. This is going to make you laugh. It was the same in the fishing village. This is in the 1950s and 60s, and all the fishermen would know we were coming because everybody knew everybody. And when we came, the fishermen had left whatever they'd caught that morning ready for us. So we ate all week. We ate lobsters, we ate crabs, we ate mackerel. The fruit of the sea. It was all there, just on the step. Nobody nicked it or anything like that. It was just waiting there for my granny, Mary Bell, as she was called, and live lobsters, because I still remember them boiling them in the pot to obviously kill them and everything else, and the same with crabs. And there was a kind of back kitchen. I can still smell that back kitchen. It was the smell of the sea. Absolutely, and seafood and so on. And she used to have them in a big sink underwater until she was ready to do it. And I never thought anything of this. And when you talk to people later on, well, oh, you're a lobster. What do you mean lobsters? What are they? I've never eaten lobsters. And it was just commonplace. And then we used to get taken out in the boats and so on with the fishermen and so etc. So it was a pretty lively place for a long time. Decent decent fishing boats would come into the harbour, and my granddad would know them all, and it's when a lot of the family were dying off, as it were. it kind of fell to me to do a lot of organising and to do things with the cemetery. And I spoke with the undertaker and stonemasons and so on, and I got on very well with them. Because I knew their surnames and they knew who I was. Could you believe it? Even they knew who I was. They were my age or a bit younger, but they knew who I was. And we'd be chatting on the phone and talking about places around Port William. And the guy said to me, he said, and I talked about this particular bay for swimming. It was a beautiful bay near a golf course, nice sand that goes out a long way, nice cliffs and rocks. Although being a little bit cold, of course, but it was a wonderful place. If you'd had the weather they have in the south of France or Spain, this kind of place would just be, unbelievable. And I was asking him about it. It's called the Back Lag. And he said, John, he said, most people in Port William today wouldn't know where that is because it's now populated by lots of people who have retired and lots of English people who have retired. They want the solitude. They want the quiet life. They've done the houses up and they look lovely. Small little fishing houses and they look great. It's never looked better in a sense, but local people have kind of all gone. And the village isn't what it was. There used to be 3 pubs, for crying out loud. No pubs. Yeah, 3 pubs in a little fishing village. No pubs now. All
Really?
all falling down, all closed up, and so on. Which is not uncommon around coastal areas around Britain, to be honest, unless you're in the big tourist traps.
Mm.
So yeah,
Remind me her name, your grandma's name, Mary Bella.
Mary Bella Erskine. Mary Bella Erskine was her name, and as I said, yeah, that's right. And it was a lovely little place, really. Still had 3 bedrooms and so on. Be nice. Laura always just think, oh, what a great little bolt hole that would be to buy, and it wouldn't have been very expensive, but it's miles away. It's miles away from Sheffield, never mind London. It take you just can't, no point.
Is it still there? Is the building still there?
Oh, yes, the village has hardly changed from that kind of point of view. Oh, yeah, it's moved on. I don't know who owns it now and so on. But we always take photographs outside. And if people had a chat, then, we'd tell them who we were. I mean, the local golf course, Stephen's heard this story before, I think, but the local golf course, I talked to my uncle. He was called Jimmy. There's a surprise. He's Scottish, called James Turner. And James Turner, that's right. And I said to him one day, I said, I wanted to go and play golf. He said, well, just go down to Monreath. And I said, yes, I'm thinking about doing that. I said, so what do I do, Jimmy? I mean, to sort it out and, book it up and reserve. And he started laughing. I said, what are you laughing at? He said, just go down there and tell them who you are. I said, what do you mean, tell them who I am? Just say you're a Turner. That's all. They know who your granddad is. They know who I am. They know who your granny is. Just tell them you're a Turner. And then there's, an honesty box. So you put the money in there and that's all you do. And it was the same. Oh, right. Oh, Willie's boy. Oh, that's kind of thing. So that's what it was like. You never had to lock anything up. Doors were never locked. Cars were never locked. There's just no need. And it's on a place called Loose Bay. It's a fantastic bay. On a sunny day, it's absolutely gobsmacking. It really is stunningly beautiful. But it's not Cornwall, and it's not Pembrokeshire, and it's maybe not further up like Skye in Scotland. It's a hidden gem, really, that's kind of been missed. But it is very quiet. You go in winter and you'd be hard pressed to find restaurants. There are some nice country house hotels where you pay a lot of money to stay.
Yeah, imagine.
And you get the solitude. My uncle Jimmy, he worked in the dairy. He used to transport milk, and he was a long distance lorry driver. And then he had a heart attack, and then he was working in the dairy, fresh milk and everything else. I say the industry was doing pretty well, and then all of that just went. It just couldn't compete. And in the end, he worked as a driver in the forestry. There's a big forest area just north of there called Glentrool. The outdoor life, he loved it. So
that's your great uncle Jimmy.
No, my uncle Jimmy, but Stephen's great uncle Jimmy.
Right. Yes.
Stephen's great uncle, who he has met. He has met as a 10-year-old boy. If he's probably got a vague memory, but I'm not sure that Laura ever did. And I think I mentioned to you the other day, I've got an auntie, Jessie, who emigrated. Still remember all that. Still remember them emigrating. Still remember going with their daughters, because their daughters had to fly alone from Prestwick when they were about 10 years of age, because mum and dad had gone on ahead. Lots of people emigrated, you see, Neil, from Ireland, Wales, Scotland, England, Europe,
To the US.
to the New World. Even in the 50s, it was still better opportunities than you had in Britain. So they emigrated. So I could still remember all that, and they went to Vancouver, which looking back now was a real shame, given how close it is to Whistler and all the skiing resorts. Because I think I told you the other day, my mum and her fell out big time.
Yes. Yeah,
So,
yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
they,
They're
they,
far
they,
away now.
yeah, they did come over. 1979 it was, before Laura and Stephen were born. Jessie came over with her daughter Jeanette, and we went down to London and so on, showed them the sights. It was the usual thing, even though they were British, they'd lived away for such a long time. Because I was British, they thought I knew London inside out, and of course I did know London a bit, but not everything. But yeah, we had a good time. I'd organised tickets for the ballet, Rudolph Nureyev, no less, and so on, that went down really well. It was the ceremony, the colours with the king, the queen, should I say, and it's that now the king, the prince. So we saw all of that, and we went up the GPO tower because it had a rotating restaurant and all these wonderful things that they just thought it was great. And the only mistake I made on this little trip was I took them for dinner, evening meal, to a restaurant in Mayfair. Well, no, it was a mistake for the obvious reasons. It was a mistake. It was the same then as it is now, and
Right.
I still remember. And I was paying for everything all the time.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And
See the
then
mistake.
they had a bloody Elizabethan quartet in the corner and all this kind of thing. And I'm thinking all the time that it's beginning to dawn on me, oh dear, I'm in trouble here. How much money
Yeah.
have I got? Because it's all cash. It's all cash
Yeah.
in those days. And I remember having to go to my dad to say, how much money have you got, Dad? Because we're going to have trouble with this bill if you haven't got any. Which fortunately he did. So so we paid for that. But it's amazing how these things work out, because we had this wonderful weekend, and then only 2 days later, my granny, her mum, died. Just suddenly died. So we all ended up in Scotland for her funeral, and that was the passing of
Wow.
yeah, that's right. That was the passing of my
Of
granny,
Maribella.
for Mary Bella, absolutely. And there weren't many left in her family then. Just an aunt Elizabeth, Aunt Lizzie, we called her. She lived a little bit away. She was an Erskine, so she wasn't ever very keen on my granddad. And she lived for quite a while and they were blacksmiths, as I said. They lived in a little place near Dumfries called Spring Home. Again, things were a lot more vibrant, and we used to stay there. We used to stop there on every journey and have afternoon tea with my great granny, who used to dress all in black. All the time she was in black.
Because she
And you
was
would,
widowed, or?
no, she was widowed, but that's how a lot of the old ladies dressed. This is in the 50s, 40s, 30s. That's what they did. But don't let that mislead you. She had a great sense of humor. So she might be sitting by the hearth, an old-fashioned hearth, like you see in the movies going back and so on. But it was like that. And they had a wonderful garden because it was a blacksmith, so it was quite a big house. And we stopped there. It's not as big now when I see it, because obviously everything's bigger when you're a kid. But that would have been a good buy.
So paternal grandparents' side, you have a lot of memories of this Fort William and Luce Bay. You spent a lot of time with them by the sounds of it. You would drive up and
Yeah.
spend a weekend there, or
No,
some holidays
no,
there,
no.
or?
It was just a week's holiday.
Right.
People only got a week's holiday in those days, and we would and we would spend a week there every year from being born. But that was it. And maybe occasionally we would go, in addition to that, uh, but that was sufficient. And we could strike out from there with my granddad. We got some lovely photographs somewhere. getting the ferry across to Northern Ireland, because from Stranraer to Larne, and I can still remember as a boy going over there and seeing the police officers there with guns. Part of my political education, even as a 10-year-old, saying to my granddad, saying to my dad, why have they got guns? Our police don't have guns. Why have they got guns here? And them kind of struggling to explain to me the Catholic Protestant, really serious divisions, and murders and so on that used to go on. It was awful. I mean, when I was at university, the girl I was engaged to, her mother was from Northern Ireland, and she told me of some horrific stories of the murders and the violence that was going on all the time. Just a few miles away, really, in Northern Ireland, no distance at all, just across the water. And all that. So even as a 10-year-old, I'm beginning to start to think, this is a funny old place. What's all this Protestant Catholic stuff, And it was very, very strong. When I lived in the Borders in Selkirk, one of the fellas that worked for my dad, he used to come to the back door lots of days, lots of nights for a chat on his way home. And I used to jump up straight away and go and see him because I wanted his newspaper. I wanted to read his newspaper. I was ready to devour. Again, no TV or anything, And I used to follow a football club called Rangers, a Scottish team. And he used to follow a Scottish team called Celtic. And I always used to say to him, why do you follow Celtic? Jimmy, they're rubbish. They're always second best. They're no good and all that. And then he would say things. I never realised, of course, until I started talking to my dad. And he said, well, no, he's Catholic. If you're Catholic, you follow Celtic. If you're Protestant, you follow Rangers. Serious stuff again. This is in the 50s. I'm saying, what are you going on about? Things like this, So I was quite interested in that kind of stuff that was going on in the world, quite young.
Yeah.
I'd ask all the questions about it. Really curious.
Just reflecting on the stories about the grandparents, it sounds like you had this week-long trips. You have a lot of memories, a lot of connection with them, and then you mentioned that Maribella, your grandma, passed away. You must have been in your 20s then when that trip to London. How old were you then?
1979, so I was 30.
Wow. Okay. How old were you when William passed away?
1967. I was still at school. Be 18.
Okay.
17. I remember his funeral very well. It was a glorious day, kind of day nobody should be buried on, really. Absolutely glorious day. And I was a pallbearer because they had traditional ways of doing these things. My granny never went to the funeral. The women stayed at home. They stayed at home. And it was only the men that went. And as a 17-year-old boy, I helped to lower the coffin and me and my brother. And there are other uncles there. I remember them well. Uncle Robert, who he was he was good fun. He had a sense of humor, even during the funeral. He had us laughing and so on. I got lots of nice memories of all that. And of course, after Anne and I got married, we would still go up there for holidays. Even after my granny died, we still went up there. My uncle was still alive, and we liked it. We liked it up there. My brother would go with his family. We'd sometimes have, the whole Turner family, 11 of us, like a football team. This is before Laura and Stephen came along.
And you still had the house?
My uncle still lived in the house. Yeah, he should have bought it, but I don't know what he maybe didn't have the money. But he wasn't kind of driven like that. He never married. He had no family. We were his family, that's what he did. He didn't marry.
I want to ask about the other side. I want to ask about your maternal grandparents.
Yeah, sure. On my mum's side, they were from mining villages in the northeast of England, South Durham, and really centred in just around the area of Durham City. I don't know if you know Durham, but it's a little city. It's an ancient city. Fantastic Gothic cathedral, one of the best in Europe, and so on. Brilliant university, all this kind of thing. Very, very popular. And it's surrounded by mining villages. So that was that's what most people did. And my mother's family, she had 3 brothers and a sister. and another brother who died. I think I mentioned that, was killed in a road accident. And she was one of the younger ones, along with my uncle Sidney. Uncle Sid, he was the youngest, and then the others were a bit older. Um, and well, yeah, most of them kind of worked down the pit, unless they could get a job out of it, because it was a dangerous place. My uncle Sid left the pit, that's what he called it, left coal mining, left the pit, because he saw a fella cut in half by a machine that got out of control. And he said, well, whatever happens, I'm not going back down that hole again. Because you'd go down thousands of feet, you'd go out miles underground and so on. It wasn't like taking the coal off the surface. It was deep. It was deep mining, and so he never went back to that. But I mean, it was the same sort of thing. Everybody was poor. You're talking about my mum and dad were born in 1926. So when the war started, they were 14, 15 years of age. Later on, my dad was in the RAF at the end of the war. But my mother worked in a munitions factory, which is almost just as dangerous, to be honest.
Yeah,
even
I
as
saw that.
even as a 15-year-old, she was working there, walking miles. Everything was blackout. You couldn't get buses. She would walk 7 miles to get home at middle of the night and so on. They were called. It was a town called Newton Aycliffe, and the people, the women, the girls and women who worked in this munitions factory were called Aycliffe Angels. That's what they called them. Anybody who worked in the munitions factory kind of got a medallion, because they were regarded as angels. I'm not sure if there were explosions, but she survived. And then met my dad, and they got married. But as I say, there's her real father. He died of mining disease in his 50s, pneumoconiosis, with all the dust and so on. And she was only 13. She gave her a nervous breakdown, losing her father at 13. She went into hospital for a little while. It broke her up and so on. Um, and then especially when her mother remarried quite quickly, so that was quite a shock to the system and so on.
She
But
told you this, did she, when you were?
oh yeah,
young?
yeah. Well, I knew all this, but she told me all this, and I have many memories of going on holiday there, because that was another week's holiday, going to the northeast. What a
Okay.
difference to a fishing village! You're going to a mining town. It's filthy, it's smelly, and everything else. Although I didn't really mind all that. It was different. Everybody smoked pipes. All the men smoked pipes. Everybody had a budgerigar in their front room in a cage. Having a budgie was really fashionable and trendy
Symbol,
and everything else.
status symbol, was it?
I don't know what it was really, whether it was status or not. Everybody, the houses were a little bit better. They had indoor toilets, and they had outdoor as well. And they had, two or three, maybe only was it two or three bedrooms, depending on the house. And of course, they had another thing at the back by the outside loo, which was the coal shed, because if you lived in these mining villages, you got coal for free.
Yeah,
So
it's a bit
they
different
were
from fresh fish and lobster, isn't it?
fresh fish and lobster down in Scotland, and free coal here. So at least
I guess
you
they're
had a
warm.
winter, like the winter fuel allowance for pensioners these days. You never went cold.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
always had fuel. But
Hungry. You might
it
be
was
hungry, but you're not cold.
it was filthy, because when I got up there, my granny would get me to shovel it from out where it was just dumped into the coal shed, and then it could be brought into the house. And it was filthy, the fumes and the smoke, and it was filthy. But I have some wonderful memories there, because they're back-to-back houses. There were mining houses, loads of them, and they're just like an ordinary street and so on, with a drainage area down the middle. And that's where I first started to play cricket. All the
Ah,
boys, we would play
okay.
football and cricket on that back street.
Perfect
Um,
lane, isn't it? It's a perfect sort of
yeah,
strip.
that's right. That's
Wicket.
right.
Yeah,
And you just put the dustbin out as the wicket.
yeah,
You
yeah.
obviously put a coat down at the other end, and you'd have some kind of bat, some kind of ball. And everybody, all the lads, no girls, all the lads used to come out and we'd play cricket. Obviously, if we were really keen, which we were, later on some of the day, we'd go down to the recreation park, the rec,
Yeah.
and you play on grass or you play football down there. But we would. That's how we, And I was a Scottish boy, but they said, "Oh, you just fit in and you just play." Because it doesn't matter where you come from. If you like football, you like cricket, you're accepted, you're welcome, and we did. So all of that, and the way that they live. I mean, they like to drink like they did in Southwest Scotland, but it was all through working men's clubs.
Okay.
All through working men's clubs. A great love of allotments by miners, because when they weren't down the pit, they wanted the fresh air, they wanted flowers, they wanted vegetables. And they used to have these flower and vegetable shows. The prizes were extraordinary, because my dad was a gardener. He could grow all these things. He used to win washing machines and all sorts of things. I mean, that was a fantastic prize in those days, a bloody washing machine. Jesus, it was normally hand washing and through an old mangle. You get a washing machine. He'd grow leeks. If you know anything about the northeast of England, growing leeks was the pinnacle. To win the leek show, to have the best leeks in your town.
That's the status symbol. Yeah.
Like an Olympic gold medal. And you got the top prize for that. And so they'd have prizes for anything. The best shaped potatoes, obviously the best chrysanthemums, the best dahlias, and they used to take a real pride in all of this. And of course, my granny used to babysit me and my brother. Now I was 11, 12.
What was her name? Sorry,
Ethel. Her name was Ethel. Ethel Patterson was her name, but my mother's original name from her father, real father, was Hopper. So there was Ralph Hopper, who died. Then she married Anthony Patterson, so she became Ethel Patterson. And she's buried in. I should mention all this for Stephen and Laura. She's buried in the northeast in a little town in the cemetery, a little town called Chilton. And it's still there, and I've checked it out, and you can still read. She and her second husband are both buried there, and she did all right. She lived until she was 80, but she was the one who introduced me to beer. Was my granny. She used to babysit.
She's to blame.
Well, she did, and she used to send me out to get it. And in the northeast, a popular beer was Newcastle Brown Ale.
Oh, yeah.
Dynamite, dangerous stuff, Newcastle Brown Ale. But the women used to drink Newcastle Amber Ale. It had a blue top rather than the brown top. So it was a bit milder, not so strong.
Does that still exist?
I don't know. I do not know.
No, Newcastle Brown Ale is pretty famous. It's got a bit of a cachet to it, but I've not heard of the Amber.
I'm going golfing next week with a pal of mine up in the northeast and meeting up with some old school friends. And I will ask them if Amber Ale is still on sale, now that you've mentioned it. Yeah. So, I've got a nostalgia trip next week, as well as anything else. And anyway, I used to get the beer for her, open the top, and she used to drink it. And she used to give me a little glass of it. My brother was a bit too young. And I liked it. I liked it from the off. I thought, this I like the smell of it. I like the taste of it.
I was the opposite. I think my first taste was a lager, and I pretended to like it, but I was a bit, this is a bit too bitter.
Yeah. Well, well, I did. I mean, it didn't lead me astray. I didn't bother. I only have a drink with her and all that kind of thing. And of course, I never had to tell my mother or father what had happened or anything like that. Not. Just having a little sip. At least she didn't introduce me to cigarettes. Everybody smoked. So she might as well have done. The amount of passive smoking we all went through was nobody's business. You can't believe it. Until I was well into my 30s. I was, wherever I worked, wherever you went, you were surrounded by smoke. It was incredible. You got so used to it, you couldn't smell it on your clothes or anything like that. Places I worked, you couldn't see somebody at the far end of the room for the smoke. It was everybody had a cigarette in their hand at all times. And I did try it, of course, because just about everybody does. And Stephen's mum didn't, because she's so good. But I did have a go. But unlike the beer, I wasn't keen. I wasn't keen on cigarettes and so on. Yeah. Even to this day, I don't. But it's a long time since I've done it. But I used to like a cigar, a proper cigar, Havana cigar. Not very often, but it was nice on special occasions. going back to Stephen's gran, my mother, again, this is the war. She told me stories of German aeroplanes flying overhead down the street, Messerschmitts and things like that, firing their guns and bullets, dropping bombs. This is what they had to live through during the war. This was commonplace, and they were running like hell to get into their houses and so on, because the German fighters were just if they had bullets to spare, they were just going to let go. My father always told me a story when he was 1941, 42, walking on the beach in Scotland. I think actually he was on a massive cart horse because he used to deliver milk, and going along the beach, and this German plane came over, and very low. In fact, so low he could see the pilot. The pilot could see him. The pilot nodded. This German pilot nodded to this boy on a horse. Goodness knows what the German pilot was thinking. It's an idyllic scene, really, when you think about it, in this beautiful bay. But if he'd wanted to sort of turn the plane round and let fire, none of us would be here, that's for sure. But he didn't.
Right. Okay. I thought it was going to be some sinister story where he looked at him and then pressed the button.
No,
but thankfully
no,
he was.
no.
Okay, good.
No, that's right. And yeah, absolutely. That was, and even that struck home with my dad that he was a bit lucky that he maybe got away with that, or maybe he'd run out of ammunition. Who knows? It's like the sliding doors things that we talked about the other day, the close escape that you
Yeah.
have in your life, and countless ones. Stephen, Laura didn't have so many, I don't think, but Stephen certainly had one or two as well. One where Anne and I are still convinced that he escaped sepsis, or they got on top of it before it took hold, or else that would have done for him.
When he was tiny.
Well, he wasn't that tiny. No, he wasn't. He was 7 or 8, 9, something like that. But we got him to the children's hospital quickly enough, and they got the antibiotics in, and they brought everything down. His knee it was like something out from outer space, the colours of it and the throbbing and so on. And you could see how badly infected it was, and that could easily have spread. Sepsis is a swine of a thing, really. If I go back to my mother, Stephen's granny, the big event they had was the Durham Miners' Gala. This is where all the mining villagers came for a weekend, a day, into Durham. Flags flying, banners flying. You got to remember politically, this was a very Labour Party area. It was a massive stronghold for the Labour Party, and the miners were the same. And all the Labour politicians used to be there at a place called the County Hotel, which I've stayed at and been to many, many times, and they used to make their speeches, etc. And then the miners, after their parades, would basically get drunk, get absolutely sloshed. There would be a race meeting down. I think Stevens played cricket down at the racecourse ground by the river. Beautiful area, really. My mother always used to say, "Oh, we used to love it because they used to be lying in the gutter." The miners, absolutely out their heads, drunk, money falling out their pockets or just dropped on the pavement or whatever. And all the kids would be there picking this up and taking the money, nicking the money, and so on. This was the tradition of the Northeast for decades, until the mines started to close down, which of course they did. They became uneconomic because they were too deep. You couldn't compete with abroad where they just picked the coal up from the ground. You had to go down 2,000 feet and go 4 miles. I don't know if you've ever been down a coal mine, a deep mine, it's an experience.
Yeah.
My cousin, who was a little bit older, and he went down the mines to work. It's where I learnt naughty words like the F word and the C word and so on. It was mixing with him and his cronies and all that kind of thing. And there was no health and safety there. He took me down the mine as a 13-year-old, 14-year-old boy, and saw them working. And then we'd come back up on the lift and into the showers and all the banter, all the effing banter and everything that was going with it. And then he tried to take me to the pub as well. It was another bit of education as you're growing up, which was fantastic, really. And
yeah. It's nice to have the diversity of both the two sides, the sort of fishing heritage and the mining heritage. It's quite an interesting mix.
It's an amazing mix, really. An amazing mix. Yeah.
But quite representative of that time, right?
Oh, very.
I mean, as you said, masonry, fishing,
Yeah.
all those industries, mining. Those are the industries of the time.
They were absolutely the big employers, massive employers, in fact, and jobs for life. Although all the miners, for most of them, the last thing they wanted was their kids to go down the mine. There had to be something better, and my father and mother certainly had that attitude. That was their belief in education, for both me and my brother. And if there were any signs that we had some brains and we could do something else, then that's what we're going to be encouraged to do, and that's what we did do. But the mines had closed down. There was never any intention, I mean, of me going down a mine. That never crossed my mind. I was going to do that. I mean, for a start, I'd had God knows how many summer jobs. When you're at university, you have that. And I worked school holidays, 15-year-old and so on. Did all sorts of jobs, and in factories, and really tuppence halfpenny factories. They were dangerous places. And I soon learned, I'm going to study. I'm going to work hard. There's no way I'm ending up like this. I worked in a metal box factory. It made metal drums, that contain liquids and so on. So you can imagine, you know the shape of a metal drum, but they obviously don't start like that. And they have to be cut out. These bits of metal have to be cut out and then slammed together and everything else. And I mean, there were young lads my age, maybe a bit younger, who couldn't get any other job, and they worked there. And not one of them had the end of every finger on their hand. They'd all got caught by a machine and got chopped off. And on my first day, just cutting out the lid, just cutting out this massive lid, you'd clamped it down and you took the cutter round and then you picked it off. No gloves or anything like this. And of course, I caught my finger and I sliced that in half. That was the first morning. And the fitter came with an oily rag, basically, or he had oily hands, and just wrapped it up. And I got on with it. I never cut myself again. I learned straight away. And actual fact, I had quite a happy time there, but it just reinforced, I can leave here. I don't have to do this. These people do. And the other bit about that place that was a bit of an education, because I'd never come across homosexuals before when I was younger. At school, as far as I was concerned, as far as all my friends were concerned, we were all heterosexual, straight and so on. We never just never saw anything like this until I worked at this factory. And he was he was the lorry driver who would transport the drums, and we would load the lorry up. And he was a big, muscular fella. I mean, whatever. I mean, he was, again, another well-built bloke. And then he opened his mouth, and he was so sweet, so gentle, so effeminate. I was absolutely staggered, and so on. and he used to say, he said, I'm going out on Friday night. We're going to such and such a club. He said, do you want to come along? Because I think I was 18 and 19 at that time, or 17 or something. And I said, no, I didn't mind him. I mean, we're fine. We've had a glass. I said, no, I'll give that a miss. And all the other lads, we all got used to it. And everybody was kind of tolerant and okay about it. It was just coming across this for the first time was also an education. I'd never done that before. Yeah, it's interesting, because there was one point I've got it here. I might as well bring it in here now, which is jumping way ahead. It's jumping to now even. Now, obviously, since then, I've come across lots of people, men and women, who are gay. That's fine, but that kind of minority I never come across before, and other minorities, haven't figured in my life. For instance, I don't have any non-white friends. I don't have any non-white friends. I don't even think I have any non-white acquaintances. There's a big difference, obviously, between those. My wife hasn't. And I've been thinking about this for a while. I think, how has this happened?
Even through the cricket club? Even through the cricket?
Well, no. Certainly not. No, there were one or two boys and fathers, but they played for opposition teams. But no, not really through the cricket club. Stephen's friends. I mean, I will ask Stephen and Laura. Do you have any non-white friends? Because I don't think they do. I don't know whether you do.
I mean, I struggle to think. It's funny because we're talking 40 years, 30 years on from your time, and it's pretty similar for me, to be honest. I'm trying to rack my brains.
Yeah.
And it's not. It's almost like it's the opposite of what I want.
Yes,
But
quite.
I haven't actively made that happen. But yeah, I think it's probably harder in your generation because integration is. You'd say integration would be better now,
Yes,
but
yeah,
even
that's
then,
right.
I'm here saying to you that I'm probably in a similar position. So where did this reflection come from? You were just thinking about
I
it.
don't know.
Or?
It just dawned on me really, and I'm thinking, in the bubble that I live in, the bubble that we all live in. I live in a very middle class bubble. Um, and yeah, I mean, to be fair, there weren't many non-white people around as I was growing up. Not obviously at university, you bumped into people, but
And teaching staff? What about the teaching staff?
no,
Mixed? Or not?
no,
Really? No.
no. There was a French assistant once who came from West Africa. And when I was very young, I got on well with him. And I remember him educating me about how he was brought up. He could speak French, English, and talking about family. And he says, "No, that's not my upbringing." I said, "Well, what happened?" He says, "No, we lived in the village." He said, "All the women brought all the children up." He said, "I knew who my biological mother was, but they all did it. It wasn't a family. It was a big family." And I'd never heard that before and so on. But we were no, he just left and moved on. But yeah, the paths that I moved in it's ridiculous, really. I think that's happened, and it's still the case now. Anyway, I just thought I'd put that in because that seemed to be an opportune point. I will make the point now of listening to the recording that I've done with her, with all the details of all the family names, other family names who lived around Durham. I told you the story, didn't I? I did about the circus leaving one of their babies with my great granny to be brought up.
No.
I, th-
No, you
I
didn't.
thought I did. Oh,
No, I think I remember that one.
oh,
I listened to the recording back again because I remember you saying you had the recording, your mother, and you weren't ready to listen to it. So
yeah,
I
oh
remember
yeah.
that.
Well, I
I
tried.
remember the story.
Well,
I think I remember the circus.
Well, yeah. Well, it was my granny and my great aunt where they lived. There was a spare bit of ground, and the circus used to set up there, and people would go to the circus because there was no TV and all this kind of thing. We're back in the 1920s, 30s, actually 1930s, and they used to set up. It'd be a traveling circus, moving on and so on. And the last night. On that last night, the people in the circus, they'd met people who lived locally. They asked my great aunt to look after their baby. I mean, they had a fair number of children. This was the youngest, and she said, "Yes, of course I will." And they put on the show and everything else, and then nobody came back for the baby. They were going to pick the baby up the next day, and the next day nobody arrived, and they'd scarpered. They'd scarpered leaving the baby with my great aunt because they had too many children in the circus, and they could see that my great aunt and the house that she'd got and everything, this was going to be a better upbringing for he was called Raymond. I don't know if that was his original name or what. That's what they called him, Raymond. And my great aunt brought him up, abandoned by the circus.
So he's your uncle then?
Well, great.
Big-
Yes. He would have been, or something like that, or maybe once removed, etc.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
I think I only met him once or twice. These are huge families, Neil, and there, as with all families, with all friendship groups, there are certain people you gravitate towards and you spend time with, and there are certain people you only see at funerals and weddings.
Yeah.
And he was one of them. I don't think
But he stayed in he stayed in that family.
he stayed in the family.
They raised him.
Stayed,
They raised him.
yeah, he stayed in that area. My mum used to talk about him. She didn't like him. She didn't like him at all. But he did. He was brought up. I don't know what happened to him.
Wow.
I'd have to go again. My mother has portrayed a family tree, so I suppose I could track people down. I've never had the inclination to do that quite yet. It always seemed to me a thing that you know you do when you're old, and you don't like to think of yourself as old.
Well, my brother-in-law did it actually. He used something called Heritage, I think it was called,
Oh yeah, yeah.
or Ancestry. Sorry, it's like a website.
Okay.
Ancestry. You
No, I
have
have
a
heard of it.
membership,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I think, well, yeah, I think you can actually discover he discovered some very cool things. Like he found tickets of travel from, I don't know, UK to Australia of his grandparents, and then he went into our family and did a lot as well.
All
But
right.
finding actual sort of physical items rather than just a name and a place of birth or whatever.
Yeah.
Finding some actual, rich material almost.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I don't have a legacy beyond family, really. And I mentioned the other day about safety and healthiness and happiness and so on. And I know that I'm very, very lucky beyond measure, absolutely beyond measure. And I think I'm the same. I can speak for Anne, for the joy and the happiness that Stephen, Laura, and his family have given us and continue to do so with Lisa and Leon and all the grandchildren. And so unbelievably grateful to them all and to Stephen and Laura in the first place, the time, we spent together. We thought all of that was so important. Holidays were very, very important to us. And although they perhaps have a very distant memory of holidays in Spain when they were young, God, Anne and I absolutely adored it with them. It was just amazing. And then the Disney holidays, when they do have memories, they do remember all of that. But that was just, fantastic times, really. Um, uh, and although that sounds a bit soft, really, you've got to really think of all those times spent together, because you don't actually have as long as you think. So Stephen's 42. You take 3 years off because for the first 3 years you don't know you've got a father. So he's known me for 39 years. I knew my father on the same kind of calculation for only 36 years. It's nothing. It's absolutely nothing. For my mother, I obviously knew her for a lot longer, but when it's much later in life, um, things can go wrong. It spoils the relationship. It certainly did with my mother, and she became a very difficult person to deal with, and so on. And that's how it hadn't been. So when you look at all of that, you're even more grateful for the time that you have had together. Um, so
I've got an interesting fact for you, John, that I probably came across as I was developing the idea, or that motivates me to do this, is that you spend 70%, 75% of the time you spend in physical contact with your children happens up until they're 14, because thereafter they're spending time with their friends. They leave the house, then they have their own family, and actually, you see them for a weekend or around the golf, and the actual time, all that time is front loaded to your life with them. So these moments you're talking about, those are the special, rich memories that you loaded up on in that time. But for me, it was quite shocking. It made me think, okay, well, what am I going to do differently now with my kids,
yes.
because they're going to leave soon.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I've talked about the holidays there, but later on in life, with both Stephen and Laura, but I guess more Stephen, when I introduced them to skiing and golf, the pleasure I've had from those two activities with them, you just cannot be happier than the feelings I had. The first time when Stephen was 15, Laura was 17, Anne wasn't interested. And for the first time, I said to Anne, well, I'm going and I'm taking them with me. You come, if you want. If you don't, you don't, but I'm going. And of course, we didn't have a row about it, because as soon as I mentioned it to Stephen and Laura, they were straight in. They were up for it. So, there was no argument. And we went to a place called La Tuile in Italy.
Okay.
And we were lucky because the snow was fantastic, the blue skies were fantastic, and so on. And we were doing these adult things together, because there was lots of après ski. We were within a group, a lots of 20, 30, 40 somethings. I was maybe a little bit older. In the evening, drinking, eating, laughing, banter, joking. And they loved it. I loved it. The whole thing was just that next part of growing up, not just the skiing, because obviously they were learning and so on. But Stephen took to it very quickly and got really, he liked the speed and everything else. And it wasn't very long before, right at the end of the week actually, and he came past me down a bloody piste or whatever, and he turned round and he said, because it was the word at the time, he turned around and he said, "Laters." You know, and I know, a cheeky bugger. But then, of course,
teenage boy's rite of passage, isn't it? Just to beat dad or
absolutely.
something.
You know, the old man. You know, going past the old man in no time. I loved it. I loved all that. And then, of course, Laura came a couple of times and has done since then with her family, which has been tremendous, amazing, just so wonderful with the grandchildren. And I hope that that'll be the case for Stephen's. But then Stephen and I did a lot of skiing together, and we went all over Europe, and just marvelous, because I was able to go sometimes non-peak times. He obviously was going to be at university or something. It was dead easy. If I said, well, I want to go skiing again, well, you've been once, you've been twice. I was keen to go again. So we'd have a row, and then Steve would come back from university and say, well, when we're going, Dad, it's Easter, you know, let's get off to wherever, Belplan or something like that, you know. And obviously great memories, and great memories of things that you kind of got away with, you know, in the early days, essentially big bloody mogul fields that you hadn't really meant to go anywhere near, but you stumbled on, you know, up on the Roc de Mio in Belplan, and we went up to the top. And there was a button lift, a little blue run right up to the top. We came down, and then the fog just descended. It came down, and before we knew where we were in these. Thanks, Anne. Hey, the intern's here.
Stephen messaged me. I mean, IT professional. I didn't mean intern. He was like, she won't forget that. And I was like, I don't know. That's what you say. You say intern. I don't know.
No, it's great. Not really. Yeah. Have you ever seen the film with Robert De Niro called The Intern?
No.
Oh, fabulous film. He's an old intern. He's an old guy who's an intern.
Okay.
But he cuts it up. But anyway, we stumbled on these 10 feet bloody moguls and so on. And of course, after a little while, I went over and went down, I don't know, 100 yards. Stephen seemed to manage them, but I went down. But after that, as we got through the mogul field, the rest of the run was the best run of the week, but we got away with it, you know, stuff.
Yeah.
So the skiing was just brilliant with him. And the same with the golf, you know. I think Stephen knows all this, but again, the time we spent playing golf together has been amazing. Even I used to play with three guys, three of us, and Stephen, he was only 15, but he'd shown keenness. And I said to them, do you mind if we make a 4-ball with Stephen? And I said to Stephen, I'm like, you know, we get up early to tee off early. I'll give you a shout, but that'll be it. If you're not interested, you're going to bed. That's it, gone. But he was up straight away, and he joined us, and he was good with adults and all that kind of thing. So he settled into that, and we've never looked back as far as the golf is concerned. So I mean, there's a million things about that, but I just wanted to mention that. There's loads of things, and I'm not drifted off the point of legacy, because with all of that, if at the end of the day, somewhere in the future, Stephen is talking to you and he says, I had such good parents and a sister I love very much, well, that'll be good enough for me. If that's what he says, that's my legacy. If he will say, I had such nice parents, and a sister I love very much, I don't want anything else. Loads of people don't have very nice parents, and I would think I've done a job then.
That's wonderful.
Philosophy of life, you mentioned, you made me think a lot. I don't have a philosophy of life in the sense of a grand philosophy like Christianity or Buddhism. It's not that I don't have a lot of time for those things, to be honest. That's not to say I don't have a lot of time who are Christians. I've come across people who are good Christians and they do a good job. They practice what they preach. And they've done many, many nice and wonderful things for people, to help people in this world, far more than I have. Great respect for some of those people, but I'm not a great respecter of those big religions. So I don't have a kind of philosophy for life. You talked about money and happiness, and again, you talk to people and say, "Oh, I wish I could win the lottery. When this is what I'd do. I'd love it if I could win the lottery or something." And I just think, well, hang on a minute. I mean, how many lotteries in my life have I won already? When you think about it. But a start, I'm alive. I was born. It's the biggest lottery of all. How the hell did I get here? And after the Second World War, not before it or before the Great War like my granddad had to do. I was born in the UK. Could be anywhere in the world. Second half of the 20th century. I never went without, especially later in life. I was intelligent, fit. I'm 70, almost 75 years of age. Touch wood, I've never had a serious illness. I'm blessed with children, I'm blessed with grandchildren, had a good career, traveled the world, enjoyed growing up. How many lotteries do I want to win? I won them all.